Welcome back, dear viewers, and you're still watching Cairo Local Time. And in this segment of our program, we will talk about the U.S.-Africa Summit, which is currently taking place in Washington with the participation of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. To shed more light on the importance of this summit, we are joined over the phone by Ambassador Ahmed Hagag, former OAU Assistant Secretary General. Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador.
Good afternoon.
So, sir, let's first focus on the significance of the U.S.-Africa Summit and to what extent this summit will increase cooperation between African countries and the United States.
I think the present U.S. administration has recognized that the United States is lagging behind other superpowers.
Yes.
In dealing with Africa, like China, Japan, European Union. And the former president, for instance,
Yes.
Trump of the United States, ignored completely Africa during his tenure. But the last U.S.-African summit was held by President Obama 8 years ago.
Yes.
And it was the only summit. This is the second summit. Other countries like Japan, Russia, China, they have periodic summits every 3 or 2 years. Even France have a summit every year. So I think the United States is recognizing that it has ignored Africa for some time. And President Biden took this opportunity to invite the OU member states, heads of state, to participate in Washington in this important summit. I think African countries should recognize the importance of this. It's late, it's better than nothing. So they have to recognize this importance of this summit and try to establish a cooperative agreement with the United States using its strong economy, hoping to bring more American investments in the continent, open its borders to free trade zone. I've noticed that President Biden's speech before the heads of state, he said that he is going to establish an agreement with the new African trade zone, which was established in 2019. And entered into operation last January. This is very important. And he's also announced that he is going to support the inclusion of the African Union to be a member of the Group of 20.
Yes, Mr. Ambassador. Thursday's sessions are entitled An Africa of Good Governance, Democracy, Respect for Human Rights, Justice and the Rule of Law. So how do you read this session today and its importance?
I think in this conference, the United States is careful not to mention democracy and human rights and
Yes.
good governance, because the African countries are tired of taking these admonition from the United States administration. This doesn't mean that they have to violate human rights and not to have good governance, but
Yes.
it have to come from the countries themselves without any diktat from any other country.
Yes. Also on Wednesday, the U.S.-Africa Business Forum discussed the future. Yes, it seems.
Please.
Yes, sir. The U.S.-Africa Business Forum discussed the future of U.S.-Africa trade and investment relations and partnership to finance African infrastructure and energy transition. So, sir, do you think that if the United States invested more in Africa, we will see a better infrastructure, energy transition, as we have all seen that there is a Chinese interest? Only we see Chinese interest in the African continent.
I think even the United States recognize that Chinese investment in Africa is much bigger than
Yes.
the USA, although the United States relations with African continent date back longer than China's relation with Africa. So far, U.S. Investments in Africa are $30 billion, while China invested $55 billion in Africa last year. So, and also in the trade relation, I think there is a trade gap. The Chinese trade relation almost $250 billion last year, while the Americans one is only $60 billion. So the gap is there. The United States has to increase its economic relations, but the United States has one shining example. I think it is in the health sector. It is trying to help Africa with vaccines, and also they have good cultural institutions, universities, which attract many African students. But this is not enough. I think the United States has to diversify the relations with African many sectors in order to catch up.
Yes. So, sir, also can you elaborate the importance of Egypt's participation in this important U.S.-Africa summit? How can Egypt benefit from its presence in this event?
I do remember from my work at the Egyptian Foreign Ministry, we used to have annual consultations with the United States on Africa, once in Washington and once in Cairo.
Yes.
I hope it is still going on, but I think we have to revisit this tradition, and we have to propose also tripartite cooperation. Egypt, United States, and one African country, or Egypt, United States, the African Union. I think with the three parties, we can produce an African input in cooperation agreement, which will be try to enhance economic and cultural progress in Africa. So it is the presence of President Sisi will give a great spark in U.S. African relations, and I think President Sisi visited the Pentagon today, and because Egypt has a strong relationship with the United States in the military field, and Egypt also has a strong relationship with African countries in training African officers and soldiers, having other exercises, even with the United States, with African countries.
Yes, okay. I'd like to thank you, Ambassador Ahmed Hagag, former OAU Assistant Secretary General. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, sir. And the U.S.-Africa Summit hosted by U.S. President Joe Biden continues its activities in Washington on Thursday. Thursday's sessions are entitled An Africa of Good Governance, Democracy, Respect for Human Rights, Justice and Rule of Law. On Wednesday, the U.S.-Africa Business Forum discussed the future of U.S.-Africa trade and investment relations, as well as partnerships to finance African infrastructure and energy transition. U.S. President Joe Biden called on Wednesday for a broad partnership with Africa and highlighted new U.S. investments, saying closer ties were crucial for the world. Biden also outlined some $55 billion in U.S. funding planned for Africa over the next 3 years, including $100 million for clean energy. So a short break, and we'll be back with our coverage for the U.S.-Africa Summit.